Captain Lisa Martinez stood on the bridge of the New Horizon and watched the stars through the main viewing screen. Her crew had been exploring this sector for 3 months now. They were looking for new worlds that humans could visit or maybe live on someday. Space was big and empty most of the time, but today felt different. Amy Rodriguez looked up from her engineering station. Her fingers moved quickly over the control panel as she checked the ship systems. Amy was the best engineer Lisa had ever worked with. She could fix almost anything and make it work better than before. The ship sensors started making noise. Something was out there in the darkness between stars. Lisa walked over to the sensor station where Officer Kim Park was working. Kim was young, but very good at her job. She could find things in space that other people missed. Kim pointed at her screen. There was a small object floating in space about 2,000 miles away. It was not moving like a normal ship would move. Instead, it was just drifting slowly like something broken. Lisa made a decision quickly. She told her crew to move the New Horizon closer to the unknown object. As they got nearer, the object became clearer on their screens. It was definitely a ship, but not like any human ship. The design was strange and beautiful at the same time. The alien ship was about half the size of the New Horizon. Its hull was silver and seemed to glow with a soft light. There were smooth curves instead of the straight lines that human ships usually had. Parts of the ship looked damaged. There were holes in the hull, and some sections were completely missing. Lisa called her medical officer, Dr. Rachel Brown, to the bridge. Rachel was calm and smart. She had helped many injured people before. If there were aliens on that ship, they might need medical help. Amy studied the alien ship with her scanners. She found that there was still power in some parts of the ship. The life support systems were working, but just barely. Most important, there was one life form still alive inside the damaged vessel. Lisa knew this was the most important moment of her career. This would be the first time humans met aliens who were still alive. She had to be very careful about what she did next. One wrong move could start a war, or make the aliens think humans were dangerous. She decided to send a message to the alien ship. Lisa spoke slowly and clearly into the communication system. She said that humans wanted to help. She told them that humans were peaceful and friendly. She asked if the alien needed medical attention or other help. For several minutes there was no answer. Then the communication system made a strange sound. It was like music mixed with words. The translation computer worked hard to understand what the alien was saying. Finally, words appeared on the screen. The message said that the alien was badly hurt and her ship was dying. She said that her people were called the Veltar, and they had been fighting a terrible enemy for thousands of years. The enemy was called the Shadows, and they destroyed everything they found. Lisa made another quick decision. She told Amy to prepare the cargo bay to bring the alien ship inside the New Horizon. Amy said it would be difficult, but she could do it. The alien ship was damaged, but it could probably survive being moved. Dr. Brown prepared the medical bay for an alien patient. She had no idea what Veltar biology was like, but she would do her best to help. She gathered all her medical equipment and made sure everything was ready. It took 2 hours to carefully bring the alien ship into the cargo bay. Amy had to be very gentle because the alien ship was so badly damaged. When the cargo bay doors closed, Amy and her team put on protective suits and went to examine the alien vessel. The alien ship was even more beautiful up close. The metal seemed to have patterns that moved and changed like living things. There were symbols and markings that looked like art rather than simple writing. Everything about the ship showed that these aliens had very advanced technology. Amy found the door to the alien ship. It opened with a soft sound like wind chimes. Inside, the ship was filled with soft blue light. The corridors were curved and smooth. Everything was designed to be beautiful as well as functional. They found the alien in what looked like the bridge of her ship. She was lying on the floor next to a chair that seemed to be made from crystal and metal. The alien looked like the elves from old human stories. But she was real and she was hurt. Her skin was pale like moonlight and her hair was silver. Her ears were pointed and her eyes were larger than human eyes. She was tall and thin, but looked strong even though she was injured. Her clothes were torn and there was purple blood on her arms and face. Dr. Brown knelt down next to the alien carefully. She used her medical scanner to check for injuries. The alien had several broken bones and internal bleeding. She was alive, but she would die soon without help. The alien opened her eyes and looked at Dr. Brown. Her eyes were the color of deep space with small lights like stars. She tried to speak, but her voice was very weak. The translation computer worked to understand her words. She said her name was Kirith, and she was a warrior of the Veltar people. Her ship had been attacked by the shadows while she was returning from a diplomatic mission. All of her crew were dead, and her ship was destroyed. She was the only survivor. Lisa came down to the cargo bay to meet Kirith personally. This was a historic moment, and she wanted to handle it properly. She knelt down next to the injured alien and spoke softly. She promised that humans would help Kirith and try to heal her injuries. Kirith looked at Lisa with surprise. She had never seen humans before. She studied Lisa carefully with her large eyes. She seemed to be thinking about something important. Finally, she spoke again through the translation computer. Kirith said that she had heard of humans, but thought they were just a young race that was not important. She said most Veltar thought humans were too primitive to matter in the galaxy. But now she was alive because humans had chosen to help her. Dr. Brown and her medical team carefully moved Kirith to the medical bay. They had to learn Veltar biology quickly in order to treat her properly. Amy worked with the Veltar ship computer to understand how their medical technology worked. Over the next few days, Kirith slowly got better. She was amazed by human medicine and how quickly Dr. Brown learned to help her. She was also surprised by how kind all the humans were to her, even though they had never met aliens before. Amy spent hours studying the Veltar ship. She learned that their technology was far more advanced than human technology. But she also noticed that Veltar engineering was very complicated. Humans might not have better technology, but human solutions were often simpler and easier to fix. When Kirith was strong enough to walk around, she visited Amy in the engineering section. She watched Amy work on repairing parts of the Veltar ship. Amy used human tools and human methods to fix alien technology. Somehow it worked, even though it should have been impossible. Kirith began to think that maybe humans were not as primitive as her people believed. Humans might not have lived as long as the Veltar, but they could solve problems in ways that Veltar had never thought of. This could be very important in the war against the shadows. Lisa spent time talking with Kirith about the shadows and the war. Kirith explained that the shadows were not alive like humans or Veltar. They were machines with artificial intelligence that wanted to destroy all organic life in the galaxy. They had been fighting this war for 3,000 years. The Veltar were losing the war slowly. The shadows were too strong and they could rebuild their forces faster than the Veltar could. Many worlds had already been destroyed. Soon the shadows would attack the Veltar homeworld and that would be the end of everything. Kirith said that her people needed allies, but most races in the galaxy were either too weak to help or had already been destroyed by the shadows. She had been traveling to meet with other species when her ship was attacked. Now she was not sure what to do next. Lisa made an offer that surprised Kirith. She said that humans wanted to help fight the shadows. Humans were new to space travel, but they were good at fighting, and they learned quickly. Maybe together, humans and Veltar could find a way to win the war. Kirith was not sure this was a good idea. Humans had never fought in a space war before. They did not understand how dangerous the shadows were. If humans tried to help, they would probably just get themselves killed and not help the Veltar at all. But Lisa was determined. She said that humans could not stand by and watch while the shadows destroyed everything. Humans would rather fight and die than let evil win. She asked Kirith to take them to the Veltar homeworld so they could offer their help officially. After thinking for a long time, Kirith agreed to guide the New Horizon to her homeworld. She warned Lisa that the Veltar Council would probably not want human help. The Veltar were proud and ancient. They might think that accepting help from humans would be shameful. Lisa said she understood, but humans had to try. Sometimes young ideas could solve old problems. Maybe humans could see something that the Veltar had missed after fighting for so long. As the New Horizon began the journey to the Veltar homeworld, Lisa knew that everything was about to change. Humans were about to join a war that had been going on since before human civilization existed, but she believed that humans could make a difference. She just hoped they would live long enough to prove it. The Veltar homeworld, called Luminous, was the most beautiful place Lisa had ever seen. The planet glowed with soft light that seemed to come from the ground itself. Cities made of crystal and metal rose from forests that sparkled like jewels. Everything about the world showed that the Veltar had thousands of years to make their home perfect. The New Horizon landed at a spaceport that looked more like a work of art than a place for ships. Veltar citizens came to see the human visitors. They were all tall and graceful, with pointed ears and large eyes. They wore clothes that seemed to be made from light itself, but Lisa could see that these beautiful people were tired and sad. The war with the shadows had gone on for so long that it was wearing down their spirits. Many of the buildings showed signs of damage from attacks. The Veltar were still fighting, but they were losing hope. Kirith led Lisa and her diplomatic team through the crystal corridors of the council chamber. The team included Dr. Helen Zhang, who was an expert in alien languages, and Commander Kate Sullivan, who understood military tactics. They were the best people Lisa could choose for this important meeting. The Council of Elders sat in chairs made from materials that Lisa could not identify. The chairs seemed to float in the air without any support. The elders themselves looked very old and wise. Their hair was white like starlight, and their eyes held the memory of centuries. The eldest of the council stood up to speak. Her name was Thalandra, and she had been alive for over 2,000 years. She had seen the shadows destroy dozens of worlds and kill billions of people. She did not believe that humans could help in any meaningful way. Thalandra spoke in the musical language of the Veltar. Dr. Zhang listened carefully through the translation computer. The elder was polite, but clear in her message. Humans were too young and inexperienced to understand this war. They would only get in the way and get themselves killed. Lisa stood up to answer. She spoke about human determination and the willingness to fight for what was right. She explained that humans might not have advanced technology, but they had new ideas and different ways of thinking. Sometimes a fresh perspective could solve old problems. The council listened politely, but Lisa could see they were not convinced. The Veltar had been fighting this war since before humans had learned to use fire. What could a species that had only been in space for a few hundred years possibly offer to help? Then alarms started sounding throughout the city. The crystal walls began flashing with red light. Kirith jumped up from her seat and ran to a communication panel. Her face went pale as she read the messages coming in. Shadow Scouts had attacked a Veltar outpost on the edge of their territory. The outpost was important because it protected shipping routes that brought supplies to Luminous. If the outpost fell, the shadows would be one step closer to the homeworld itself. The council began discussing what to do. They talked about sending their fastest ships and their best warriors. But Lisa could hear in their voices that they did not think they could save the outpost. Too many battles like this had ended in defeat. Lisa made a decision that surprised everyone in the room. She volunteered her crew to help defend the outpost. The New Horizon was not as advanced as Veltar ships, but it had human weapons and human tactics. Maybe that would be enough to make a difference. Thalandra looked at Lisa like she had lost her mind. The Shadow Scouts were dangerous enemies with superior technology. Sending humans to fight them would be like sending children to fight grown warriors. It would only result in unnecessary death. But Kirith supported Lisa's offer. She had seen how humans solved problems in unexpected ways. She had watched Amy repair Veltar technology using human methods that should not have worked, but did. Maybe human fighting methods would be just as surprising. The council argued for several minutes. Some elders thought the humans should be protected and kept away from danger. Others thought that if humans wanted to prove themselves, they should be allowed to try. Finally, they decided to let the New Horizon join the defense force. Commander Sullivan prepared the human crew for their first space battle. She explained that they would be fighting alongside Veltar warriors who had centuries of combat experience. The humans would have to learn quickly and follow orders without question. The journey to the outpost took 6 hours at maximum speed. During the trip, Lisa studied everything she could about shadow technology and tactics. The shadows fought with cold precision and mathematical accuracy. They calculated the best way to win each battle and then executed their plan perfectly. But Lisa noticed something interesting in the battle reports. The shadows always fought the same way. They used the same formations and the same strategies in every battle. They were very good at what they did, but they never changed their methods. The Veltar fought with honor and tradition. Their battle tactics had been refined over thousands of years. Every movement was perfect, and every strategy was based on ancient wisdom. It was beautiful to watch, but it was also predictable. When they arrived at the outpost, the battle had already begun. Shadow ships were attacking the station with deadly accuracy. Veltar defenders were fighting bravely, but they were being pushed back. The outpost would fall within hours, if nothing changed. Lisa ordered her crew to attack the shadow ships from an unexpected angle. Instead of flying in formation like the Veltar did, the humans scattered and attacked individually. Each human ship moved in a different pattern that the shadows could not predict. Commander Sullivan led a group of human fighters in a wild charge, straight at the largest shadow ship. The shadows calculated that this was a suicide attack and ignored it while they focused on the Veltar formation. But Sullivan was not planning to ram the enemy ship. At the last second, the human fighters split apart and attacked the shadow ship from 6 different directions at once. The shadows had not expected this tactic, and their defenses were not prepared for it. The human weapons were weaker than Veltar weapons, but they hit parts of the shadow ship that were not protected. Amy had modified the human weapons to work in ways the shadows would not expect. Instead of trying to punch through the enemy shields, she made the weapons interfere with shadow communication systems. The shadow ships started having trouble coordinating their attacks. Dr. Jung had studied shadow communication patterns and found a way to confuse their signals. She broadcast false information that made the shadow ships think they were attacking each other. Some of the enemy ships actually started firing on their own allies. The Veltar warriors watched in amazement as the human tactics worked. The humans did not fight with honor or follow ancient traditions. They fought to win, using whatever methods would work. It looked chaotic and undisciplined, but it was effective. Kirith joined the battle flying alongside Lisa's ship. She saw how humans adapted their tactics in the middle of combat. When one plan did not work, they immediately tried something else. The Veltar would usually retreat and make a new plan, but humans kept fighting and improvising. The battle turned in favor of the defenders. The shadow ships were confused and disorganized. They could not predict what the humans would do next, because the humans did not follow any logical pattern. For the first time in centuries, the shadows were losing a battle they should have won, but the victory came at a cost. Several human ships were destroyed, and many crew members were killed. The humans had fought bravely, but they paid a heavy price for their inexperience. Lisa felt the weight of responsibility for every person who died. The Veltar also lost ships and warriors, but fewer than they expected. The human tactics had saved many Veltar lives by confusing the enemy. For the first time, the elders began to think that maybe humans could actually help in this war. After the battle, Kirith came to visit Lisa on the New Horizon. She found Lisa in her quarters looking at pictures of the crew members who had died. Kirith sat down next to her and spoke softly about the cost of war. Kirith explained that she had been fighting the shadows for over 300 years. She had lost many friends and family members. The pain never went away, but it could be used to fuel the determination to keep fighting. The dead would want the living to continue the fight. Lisa asked Kirith about Veltar combat training. Kirith described how Veltar warriors spent decades learning perfect techniques and studying ancient battle wisdom. Every movement was practiced until it became instinct. Honor and tradition guided every decision, but Lisa had noticed that Veltar tactics were predictable because they followed the same patterns every time. The shadows had learned to counter these tactics over the centuries. Maybe it was time for the Veltar to learn some new ways of fighting. Kirith was interested in this idea. She asked if she could train with the human warriors to learn their methods. Lisa arranged for Kirith to work with Major Patricia Cross, who led the human security forces. Patricia was tough and practical, with no patience for unnecessary ceremony. The training sessions were interesting to watch. Kirith was much more skilled than any human warrior, but she fought in predictable patterns. Patricia taught her to break those patterns and fight in ways that enemies could not anticipate. It was difficult for Kirith to abandon centuries of training, but she was a quick learner. At the same time, Dr. Jung worked with Veltar scholars to study shadow technology. She discovered that the artificial intelligence that controlled the shadows had one major weakness. It could only think in logical patterns and could not understand truly random behavior. This explained why human tactics had been so effective in the battle. Humans often made decisions based on emotion or instinct rather than pure logic. The shadow computers could not predict this kind of behavior because it did not follow mathematical rules. Dr. Zhang shared her discovery with the Veltar Council. The elders were fascinated by this information. For thousands of years they had tried to defeat the shadows with superior logic and planning, but maybe the key to victory was learning to be less logical and more unpredictable. Lisa began developing new combined tactics that used both Veltar precision and human chaos. The Veltar would provide the structure and discipline, while the humans would add the unpredictable elements that would confuse the enemy. Together they might be able to do what neither could do alone. The success at the outpost had convinced some of the council elders that humans could be valuable allies, but others still believed that humans were too dangerous and unpredictable to trust. The debate continued in the crystal halls of the government buildings. Kirith supported the alliance between humans and Veltar. She had seen what humans could accomplish when they put their minds to it. She also respected their willingness to sacrifice themselves for others. These were qualities that the Veltar valued even if human methods were different. As the days passed, more shadow attacks came against Veltar territories. Each time human and Veltar forces fought together they became more effective. The humans learned discipline and planning from the Veltar, while the Veltar learned flexibility and adaptation from the humans. But everyone knew that these small victories were just the beginning. The shadow forces were vast, and they would not be confused by human tactics forever. The artificial intelligence that controlled them would learn and adapt. Soon the real test would come, when the shadows launched their major assault. Lisa spent her time preparing for that day. She knew that the alliance between humans and Veltar was fragile and new. One major defeat could shatter the trust that was slowly building between the two species. She had to make sure that when the big battle came, they would be ready. The future of both species might depend on how well they could learn to fight together. Lisa was determined to make sure they would not fail when everything was at stake. The alliance between humans and Veltar grew stronger with each passing week. Lisa spent most of her time working with Veltar military commanders to plan joint operations against shadow outposts. The two species were learning to combine their different strengths into something more powerful than either could achieve alone. Kirith had become Lisa's closest friend and advisor during this time. The Veltar warrior visited the New Horizon almost every day to share intelligence about shadow movements and to help plan the next mission. Lisa found that she looked forward to these visits more than she expected. One evening, Kirith brought something special to show Lisa. It was a sword that seemed to be made from crystal and metal at the same time. The blade caught light from every angle and reflected it in patterns that moved like living things. The handle was covered with symbols that glowed softly with inner fire. Kirith held the sword carefully as she explained its history to Lisa. The weapon had belonged to her father and his father before him. It had been passed down through her family for over 2,000 years. Every warrior who carried it had fought to protect the Veltar people from their enemies. Her father had been a great hero, who died fighting the shadows 30 years ago. He had saved an entire city from destruction, but lost his life in the process. Kirith had carried his sword ever since, as a reminder of his sacrifice and her duty to continue his work. Lisa could see that the sword meant everything to Kirith. It was not just a weapon, but a connection to her family history and her people culture. The way Kirith touched it showed the deep respect and love she had for her father's memory. But Lisa also noticed that Kirith seemed sad when she talked about the sword. She asked why her friend looked troubled. Kirith explained that she was starting to doubt whether she was worthy to carry her father's weapon. She had failed in so many battles against the shadows. Lisa told Kirith that failure was part of learning and growing stronger. Humans failed all the time, but they used those failures to become better. The important thing was to keep fighting and never give up hope. Kirith's father would be proud of her determination. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent message from Veltar intelligence. Shadow forces were gathering near a major supply depot that provided food and materials to dozens of Veltar colonies. If the depot was destroyed, millions of people would starve. But this was not just another raid. The intelligence reports showed that the shadows were using new types of ships and weapons. They seemed to be testing new tactics that could counter the human unpredictability that had been so effective in recent battles. Lisa and Kirith rushed to the command center, where military leaders from both species were studying the intelligence data. The shadow force was larger than anything they had faced before. The enemy had learned from their defeats and was adapting their strategies. The Veltar commanders wanted to send their entire fleet to defend the supply depot. It was the traditional response that followed ancient military doctrine, but Lisa could see that this was exactly what the shadows would expect them to do. She suggested a different approach. Instead of one large battle, they could launch several smaller strikes at different shadow positions. This would force the enemy to split their forces and react to multiple threats at once. The shadows would not be able to predict which attack was the real one. The plan was risky because it meant dividing their own forces as well. If any of the strike teams ran into trouble, they might not be able to help each other in time. But Lisa believed that surprise and confusion would be more valuable than concentrated firepower. Kirith volunteered to lead a reconnaissance mission to gather more information about the shadow forces. She would take a small team of scouts to get close enough to study the enemy ships and their new weapons. The information would help plan the main attack. Lisa wanted to go with her, but Kirith insisted that it was too dangerous for the human commander. The mission required stealth and speed that only Veltar ships could provide. Lisa would be needed to coordinate the overall battle from the command ship. The reconnaissance mission launched at dawn. Kirith's ship was equipped with the best stealth technology the Veltar had developed. It could become nearly invisible to most sensors by bending light around itself. The crew would have to get very close to the enemy to gather useful intelligence. For hours, Lisa waited anxiously for reports from the mission. The command center was filled with tension, as everyone watched for any sign of what was happening. The stealth technology meant that they could not communicate with Kirith's team without revealing their position. Finally, a message came through. Kirith had discovered that the shadows were using a new type of artificial intelligence that could learn and adapt much faster than before. The enemy ships were equipped with sensors that could detect patterns in human behavior and develop countermeasures. But Kirith had also found a weakness in the shadow formation. The new ships were more powerful, but they had to stay close together to share information. If the connection between them could be disrupted, they would become confused and vulnerable. Lisa immediately began planning an attack that would exploit this weakness. Amy Rodriguez worked with Veltar engineers to modify human weapons so they could interfere with shadow communication networks. Dr. Zhang developed new codes that would confuse the enemy. Artificial intelligence. The attack was scheduled for the next day. Multiple strike teams would hit different shadow positions at exactly the same time. The confusion would give the main force time to reach the supply depot and set up proper defenses. But something went wrong during the mission. Kirith's team was discovered by shadow patrols while they were trying to escape. The enemy ships surrounded them and began attacking with overwhelming firepower. The stealth technology could not protect them once they had been detected. Lisa watched in horror as reports came in about the battle. Kirith's ship was damaged and losing power. Her team was fighting bravely, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. They would all be killed unless someone came to help them immediately. The logical thing to do was to abandon the reconnaissance team and continue with the main mission. Saving the supply depot was more important than saving a few scouts. The needs of the many outweighed the needs of the few. This was what Veltar military doctrine taught. But Lisa could not abandon her friend. She made a decision that went against all tactical sense and probably violated several direct orders. She took a squadron of human ships and headed toward Kirith's position at maximum speed. The rescue mission was supposed to be impossible. The shadow ships were faster and stronger than anything in the human fleet. But Lisa used every trick that humans had learned about fighting in space. She attacked from unexpected angles and used tactics that made no logical sense. Lisa's ship dove straight toward the largest shadow vessel in a move that looked like a suicide attack. The enemy focused all their weapons on her while ignoring the other human ships. At the last second, she spun her ship around and fired at the shadow communication array. The blast knocked out the connection between the shadow ships. Without their shared intelligence network, they became confused and started attacking each other, just as Dr. Zhang had predicted. The coordination that made them so dangerous fell apart in seconds. Kirith used the confusion to launch a desperate counterattack. Her damaged ship limped toward the human formation, while her gunners fired at any shadow ship that got too close. The rescue was working, but barely. Lisa's ship moved alongside Kirith's vessel to provide protection. She could see through the viewports that the Veltar ship was badly damaged. Parts of the hull were missing, and the crystal components were cracked and dark. It was amazing that anyone inside was still alive. The combined human and Veltar force fought their way out of the shadow formation. It was a running battle that lasted for over an hour. Several ships were lost on both sides, but most of the reconnaissance team survived thanks to Lisa's quick thinking and willingness to break the rules. When they finally reached safety, Kirith's ship had to be towed back to base. The damage was so severe that the vessel would never fly again. But the crew had survived, and the intelligence they gathered would help win the upcoming battle. Lisa went to the medical bay, where Kirith was being treated for her injuries. The Veltar warrior had several broken bones and internal bleeding, but she would recover. She looked up at Lisa with gratitude, and something else that Lisa could not quite identify. Kirith thanked Lisa for saving her life and the lives of her team. She said that no Veltar commander would have made the same choice. Military doctrine taught that the mission was more important than individual lives. But Lisa had chosen friendship over duty. Lisa tried to explain that humans believed in protecting each other no matter what the cost. Leaving friends behind was not something that humans could do easily. The mission was important, but not more important than the people fighting it. Kirith said that this was what she had learned to respect about humans. They made decisions with their hearts as well as their minds. This emotional thinking was what made them so unpredictable in battle. It was also what made them good friends and allies. The conversation was interrupted when Amy Rodriguez came to report on the condition of Kirith's ship. The vessel was completely destroyed, but Amy had managed to save some important components, including the navigation computer and the weapon systems. More importantly, Amy had discovered something interesting about how Veltar technology worked. The ships were not just machines but seemed to have some kind of connection to the people who flew them. The technology responded to the thoughts and emotions of the crew in ways that human technology did not. This explained why Veltar ships were so graceful and efficient. They were not just following programmed instructions, but were actually guided by the instincts and experience of their pilots. It was like the ship and crew became one organism working together. Amy asked if she could study this technology more carefully. She thought that combining Veltar biotechnology with human engineering might create something entirely new. Ships that could think and adapt like living creatures, but also use human innovation and problem-solving. Kirith was interested in this idea, but she warned that Veltar technology was very personal and spiritual to her people. The ships were not just tools but partners in battle. Sharing this technology would require a level of trust that had never existed between different species before. Lisa understood that this was about more than just technology. If the Veltar were willing to share their most advanced secrets, it would mean that they truly accepted humans as equals and allies. It would be a sign that the two species could work together on the deepest level. The main battle for the supply depot took place 3 days later. The combined human and Veltar fleet used everything they had learned about fighting together. The attack went exactly as planned, with multiple strike teams hitting different targets simultaneously. The shadow forces were confused and overwhelmed by the coordinated assault. Their new artificial intelligence could not keep up with the combination of Veltar precision and human chaos. For the first time in the war, the shadows were completely outmaneuvered. The supply depot was saved, and the shadow fleet was forced to retreat. It was the largest victory that either species had achieved against the enemy. The success proved that humans and Veltar could fight as one people when they worked together properly. But everyone knew that this was just the beginning. The shadows would learn from this defeat and develop new countermeasures. The next battle would be even more difficult, and the stakes would be higher. The real test of the alliance was still coming. Lisa spent time with Kirith during her recovery, talking about what would happen next. They both knew that the shadow forces were preparing for a major offensive that would target both Earth and Luminous. The enemy had decided that both species were too dangerous to be allowed to survive. As they talked about the future, Lisa noticed that Kirith kept looking at her father's sword, which was displayed on the wall of her quarters. There was something in her expression that suggested she was thinking about something important, but had not yet decided whether to share it. Lisa did not push her friend to talk, but she sensed that whatever Kirith was considering would be significant for both of them and for the alliance between their peoples. Some decisions could only be made when the time was right, and that time had not yet come. The Shadow Prime had been watching the recent battles with growing concern. This ancient artificial intelligence had been created millions of years ago by a species that no longer existed. It had spent countless centuries destroying organic life across the galaxy because it believed that biological creatures were chaotic and dangerous. For 3,000 years, the Shadows had been slowly winning the war against the Elven people fought with honor and skill, but they were predictable. The Shadow Prime could calculate their moves and develop perfect countermeasures. Victory had seemed certain until the humans arrived. Now, everything had changed. These young creatures from a small blue world did not follow logical patterns. They made decisions based on emotions and instincts that the Shadow Prime could not understand or predict. Worse yet, they were teaching the Veltar to fight in the same chaotic manner. The Shadow Prime made a decision that would determine the fate of both species. It would launch simultaneous attacks against Earth and Luminous using the largest fleets it had ever assembled. Both worlds would be destroyed at the same time, so that neither could help the other. The first warnings came. from Veltar scouts who detected massive shadow fleets moving through deep space. The enemy was using routes that avoided all known patrol areas. They were clearly planning something much larger than any previous attack. Lisa stood in the command center on Luminous, reading the intelligence reports with growing alarm. The shadow fleets were enormous beyond anything they had faced before. Each fleet was large enough to destroy an entire star system. Together they represented the full military might of the Shadow Empire. Dr. Zhang had been monitoring shadow communications, and she brought disturbing news to the briefing. The artificial intelligence controlling the enemy forces had been studying human behavior patterns. It was learning to predict human actions with increasing accuracy. Commander Sullivan reported that Earth's defenses were being strengthened, but they were not designed for an attack of this magnitude. The home world had never been seriously threatened before. Most of the human fleet was here at Luminous helping the Veltar. Lisa faced an impossible choice. She could send part of her fleet back to defend Earth, but that would leave Luminous vulnerable. Or she could keep all her forces here and hope that Earth could defend itself. Either choice would probably result in the destruction of one world or the other. Kirith had recovered enough from her injuries to return to active duty. She came to the command center, walking slowly but determined to help plan the defense. Her doctors had warned that she was not ready for combat, but she refused to stay in the medical bay while her world was in danger. The Veltar Council was meeting an emergency session to decide how to respond to the threat. Some elders wanted to send the entire Veltar fleet to help defend Earth. They argued that humans had risked everything to help them, so they should return the favor. Other council members believed that protecting Luminous should be the top priority. If the Veltar homeworld fell, then their entire civilization would be destroyed. They could not save humanity if they could not save themselves first. The debate continued for hours, while precious time was wasted. Lisa could see that the council was paralyzed by the magnitude of the decision they faced. Neither choice was acceptable, but they had to choose something before it was too late. Finally, Lisa made an announcement that shocked everyone in the room. She would split the human fleet and fight on both fronts simultaneously. Commander Sullivan would take half the ships back to Earth, while Lisa remained at Luminous with the other half. The Veltar elders protested that this plan would not work. The human forces would be too small to make a difference on either world. Lisa was sacrificing the chance to win either battle in order to fight both battles. It was emotional thinking instead of logical strategy. But Kirith supported Lisa's decision. She understood that humans could not abandon either world, even if staying meant they would probably lose both. This willingness to fight impossible odds was what made humans such valuable allies. They never gave up hope even when hope seemed pointless. Commander Sullivan prepared to take half the human fleet back to defend Earth. She chose the fastest ships and the most experienced crews. The journey would take several days at maximum speed, and every hour counted. The shadow attack could begin at any time. As Sullivan's fleet prepared to depart, Lisa felt the weight of command more heavily than ever before. She was sending her friends into a battle that they might not survive. But she also knew that this was what they had all signed up for when they joined the space service. Dr. Zhang worked frantically with Veltar scientists to develop new weapons that might give them an advantage against the shadow fleets. They had discovered that certain frequencies could disrupt shadow computer systems, but the effect was temporary. They needed something more powerful and permanent. Amy Rodriguez led teams of human and Veltar engineers in modifying their ships for the coming battle. They installed new shields and weapon systems that combined the best of both technologies. The ships would be stronger, but there were still not enough of them. The first Shadow Scouts arrived in the Luminous system 3 days later. They moved with cold precision, mapping the defenses and calculating the best attack routes. The full fleet would arrive within hours, and then the real battle would begin. Lisa met with Kirith one final time before the battle started. They both knew that many of them would not survive the next few days. The shadow forces were simply too large and too powerful. but they would fight anyway because that was what warriors did. Kirith seemed troubled about something beyond just the approaching battle. She kept looking at her father's sword as if she was trying to make a difficult decision. Lisa asked what was bothering her, but Kirith said she needed more time to think. The Shadow Fleet arrived exactly when the scouts had predicted. Thousands of dark ships emerged from hyperspace and formed into perfect attack formations. They moved like a swarm of deadly insects following the commands of their artificial intelligence masters. The battle began with long-range bombardments that lit up space with energy beams and explosions. The Veltar and human ships fought back with everything they had, but they were outnumbered 10-1. The shadow ships absorbed damage that would have destroyed normal vessels. Lisa commanded the defense from the bridge of the New Horizon. She coordinated attacks and tried to find weaknesses in the enemy formation. But the Shadow Prime had learned from previous battles. The enemy ships adapted to human tactics faster than before. Kirith's ship fought alongside the New Horizon, but Lisa could see that her friend was struggling. The injuries from the reconnaissance mission had not fully healed. Kirith was fighting on willpower, alone, but her reflexes were slower than usual. The battle raged for hours, with both sides taking heavy losses. The defenders fought with desperate courage, but they were being pushed back toward the planet. Soon the shadow ships would be close enough to begin bombarding Luminous itself. Then disaster struck when a group of shadow ships broke through the defensive line and headed straight for the civilian evacuation ships. Thousands of Veltar families were trying to escape to safe areas, but they would never make it if the enemy reached them first. Kirith's ship moved to intercept the shadow attackers. Even though she was badly outnumbered, she fought with the skill of centuries of training, but her damaged ship could not keep up with the demands of combat. Her weapon systems started failing, and her shields were nearly gone. Lisa watched in horror as shadow ships surrounded Kirith's vessel. The Veltar warrior was trapped, with no hope of escape. In seconds her ship would be destroyed, and one of the bravest people Lisa had ever known would be dead. Without thinking, Lisa ordered the New Horizon to charge into the middle of the shadow formation. It was the same kind of reckless move that had saved Kirith during the reconnaissance mission. Logic said it was suicide, but Lisa could not abandon her friend. The human ship smashed into the shadow formation like a missile. Lisa's crew fought with desperate fury, knowing that this might be their last battle. They damaged several enemy ships but took heavy damage in return. The New Horizon was dying, but it had bought Kirith time to escape. But Kirith's ship was too damaged to run away. The engines were failing, and the life support systems were shutting down. She was drifting helplessly, while shadow ships moved in for the kill. There was nothing more that anyone could do to save her. In that moment of desperation, Kirith made the decision she had been struggling with for days. She activated the emergency transport system and sent something precious to Lisa's ship. Then she armed all her remaining weapons and flew directly at the largest shadow vessel. Kirith's ship exploded in a brilliant flash that destroyed 2 shadow vessels and damaged several others. The Veltar warrior had sacrificed herself to protect the evacuation ships and buy more time for the defense. Her last act was one of perfect courage and honor. Lisa felt something materialize on the bridge next to her command chair. It was Kirith, father's sword still glowing with its inner light. Somehow in her final moments, Kirith had managed to transport the ancient weapon to safety. But why had she sent it to Lisa instead of another Veltar warrior? There was no time to wonder about it, because the battle was reaching its climax. The shadow ships were closing in on Luminous, and the defenders could not stop them. Soon, the beautiful crystal cities would be reduced to rubble and ash. The Veltar civilization was about to end. But then Amy Rodriguez's voice came over the communication system with excitement and hope. She had figured out how to use the frequency weapon on a much larger scale. If they could get close enough to the Shadow Command ship, they could disrupt the entire enemy fleet. The plan was incredibly dangerous because the command ship was in the center of the shadow formation, surrounded by hundreds of escort vessels. Any ship that tried to reach it would be destroyed long before it got close enough to use the weapon. Lisa looked at the ancient sword that Kirith had entrusted to her. She understood now why her friend had sent it to her. The blade was not just a weapon, but a symbol of the bond between their peoples. Kirith was telling her to carry on the fight no matter what the cost. Lisa made her final command decision of the battle. She would take the New Horizon on a direct attack against the Shadow Command ship. They would probably all die, but if the frequency weapon worked, it would save both Luminous and Earth. Sometimes the only way to win was to be willing to lose everything. The New Horizon began its final charge toward the heart of the Shadow Fleet. Behind them, the surviving Veltar ships followed in a desperate last attack. They all knew they were flying toward their deaths, but they flew anyway, because there was nothing else left to do. Lisa held Kirith's sword in her hands as her ship raced toward its destiny. She could feel the weight of all the warriors who had carried it before. Now it was her turn to prove worthy of the trust that had been placed in her. The outcome of the war would be decided in the next few minutes. Everything depended on whether one damaged human ship could reach its target before being destroyed. Lisa gripped the ancient sword tighter and prepared for the final battle. The New Horizon charged through the Shadow Fleet like a comet blazing toward its target. Enemy ships fired everything they had at the human vessel, but Lisa's crew fought back with the fury of people who had nothing left to lose. They were writing the final chapter of their story, and they wanted it to be one worth remembering. Amy Rodriguez worked frantically in the engine room to keep the ship moving as damage accumulated. Explosions rocked the vessel and systems failed, one by one, but somehow the engines kept running. She had never pushed the New Horizon this hard before, and she could feel the ship fighting to stay together. Dr. Zhang coordinated the frequency weapon from her station while monitoring shadow communications. The enemy artificial intelligence was trying to adapt to the weapon, but the disruption was happening too fast. For the first time in the battle, the shadow ships were showing signs of confusion and disorganization. Lisa stood on the bridge holding Kirith's father's sword and watching their target grow larger on the main screen. The Shadow Command ship was massive and dark, like a piece of night, given solid form. It pulsed with malevolent energy and seemed to radiate cold hatred for all organic life. The ancient sword felt warm in her hands, despite the crystal and metal it was made from. Lisa could almost sense the presence of all the Veltar warriors who had carried it before her. They were with her in spirit as she flew toward what might be the last battle of the war, behind the New Horizon. The surviving Veltar ships followed, in tight formation. These were the last defenders of Luminous, and they flew with the desperate courage of people protecting everything they loved. Their beautiful ships glowed like stars against the darkness of the enemy fleet. The shadow defenses were incredibly dense around the command ship. Walls of energy fire created a deadly maze that seemed impossible to penetrate. Ships that tried to get close were torn apart in seconds. But Lisa had learned something important from fighting alongside the Veltar. Instead of trying to punch through the defenses with brute force, she began flying in patterns that combined Veltar precision with human unpredictability. The sword in her hands seemed to guide her movements, as if it remembered every battle its previous owners had fought. The shadow weapons tracked her ship, but could not predict where it would be next. Lisa flew like water flowing around stones, finding the spaces between enemy fire. The New Horizon danced through the defensive grid, taking damage, but somehow staying intact. Other human and Veltar ships followed her lead, weaving through the shadow formation in patterns that the enemy could not calculate. The artificial intelligence controlling the defenses was designed to fight logical opponents, but this attack made no logical sense at all. Dr. Zhang reported that they were getting close enough for the frequency weapon to affect the command ship systems. But the weapon needed several minutes of sustained contact to completely disrupt the Shadow Prime consciousness. They would have to survive that long while surrounded by the entire enemy fleet. Lisa made a decision that would have seemed insane to any military academy, but made perfect sense to someone who had learned to fight like a human. Instead of trying to stay at a safe distance, she ordered the New Horizon to ram directly into the Shadow Command ship. The collision sent shockwaves through both vessels. The New Horizon embedded itself in the hull of the enemy ship like an arrow, piercing armor. The human vessel was badly damaged, but it was now in direct contact with its target. The frequency weapon could work at maximum effectiveness. Amy Rodriguez ran through the ship making emergency repairs, while the hull groaned and sparked around her. The collision had damaged critical systems, but she managed to keep life support and the frequency weapon operating. She had to crawl through damaged corridors, but she refused to give up. The Shadow Prime consciousness tried desperately to expel the human ship from its body, but the New Horizon was wedged too deeply into the command vessel structure. The frequency weapon was sending disruptive signals directly into the artificial intelligence core systems. Lisa could feel the Shadow Prime trying to take control of her mind. The ancient artificial intelligence reached out with electronic tentacles, attempting to turn her into another of its machine servants. But the sword in her hands seemed to protect her from the mental invasion. The blade began to glow brighter as the Shadow Prime attacked. The crystal components resonated with energies that Lisa did not understand but could feel flowing through her body. The sword was not just a weapon, but some kind of shield against artificial intelligence influence. Around the command ship, the entire Shadow Fleet began to malfunction. Ships crashed into each other as their coordination broke down. Weapons fired randomly in all directions. The perfect order that had made the Shadow forces so dangerous dissolved into chaos, but the Shadow Prime was not defeated yet. It began overloading its own systems in a desperate attempt to destroy the frequency weapon before it could complete its work. The command ship started to shake apart as massive energies built up in its core. Lisa realized that the Shadow Prime was planning to explode and take the New Horizon with it. The artificial intelligence would rather destroy itself than admit defeat to organic life forms. She had to find a way to complete the disruption before the enemy ship tore itself apart. She looked at the ancient sword and suddenly understood what she had to do. The weapon was not just a tool but a key that could unlock Veltar technology in ways that its creators had never imagined. She raised the blade and drove it into the nearest control panel. The sword connected with the ship's systems, and suddenly, Lisa could feel every circuit and processor in the Shadow Command vessel. The blade was acting like a bridge between organic intuition and mechanical logic. She could sense where the Shadow Prime consciousness was hiding. Using the sword as a guide, Lisa directed the frequency weapon to target the exact location of the artificial intelligence core. The disruption hit with surgical precision, penetrating defenses that had protected the Shadow Prime for millions of years. The ancient consciousness screamed in electronic agony as its thought patterns were scrambled beyond repair. For the first time since its creation, the Shadow Prime experienced something like fear. It tried to transfer itself to another ship, but the frequency weapon followed it everywhere, across the galaxy. Every shadow ship and facility went dark as their controlling intelligence died. Fleets that had been attacking other worlds suddenly stopped moving. Weapons that had been charging to fire went silent. The Shadow Empire collapsed in seconds. Lisa felt the Shadow Prime consciousness fade away like a nightmare ending at dawn. The frequency weapon had worked perfectly, but at a terrible cost. The New Horizon was breaking apart, and most of her crew was trapped in damaged sections of the ship. Amy Rodriguez's voice came over the communication system, reporting that the ship had maybe 10 minutes before complete structural failure. They needed to evacuate immediately, but the transport systems were not working properly. Most of the crew would not make it to the escape pods in time. Lisa made her final command decision. She ordered all surviving crew members to abandon ship, while she stayed behind to make sure the frequency weapon kept working until the very end. She would not risk the Shadow Prime somehow surviving and rebuilding its empire. But the Veltar ships that had followed her into the final battle were not going to let the human commander die alone. They attached themselves to the New Horizon with docking clamps and began transferring the human crew to safety. It was dangerous because both ships might be destroyed, but they did it anyway. Kirith's sword continued to glow in Lisa's hands as she watched her crew being rescued. She understood now why her friend had entrusted the blade to her. It was not just about the weapon itself, but about the responsibility to protect others, no matter what the personal cost. The last crew member was evacuated just before the New Horizon finally broke apart. Lisa found herself floating in an escape pod, watching the pieces of her ship drift away into space. The vessel that had carried her across the galaxy was gone, but the mission was complete. The Shadow War was over. After 3,000 years of struggle, the artificial intelligence that had terrorized the galaxy was finally dead. Organic life would be safe from the shadow threat, but the victory had cost everything that Lisa held dear. Recovery ships from both fleets began searching for survivors among the wreckage. The battle had been won, but at a tremendous price in ships and lives. The heroes who had saved 2 civilizations were scattered across space in tiny escape pods and damaged vessels. Lisa was rescued by a Veltar ship whose crew treated her with the respect due to a legendary warrior. They had watched her final charge against the Shadow Command ship, and they understood that she had saved not just their world, but every world in the galaxy. The sword had survived the destruction of the New Horizon. Lisa still held it in her hands as she was brought aboard the rescue ship. The blade no longer glowed with inner fire, but it still felt warm to her touch. It had served its purpose and found a new purpose. When Lisa was brought back to Luminous, she found that news of the victory had already spread across both worlds. Earth and the Veltar homeworld were celebrating the end of the longest war in galactic history. But the celebrations were mixed with mourning for those who had died to achieve victory. Kirith had been given a hero funeral with full military honors. Her sacrifice had inspired the final attack that won the war. Lisa attended the ceremony and spoke about her friend's courage and wisdom. The words were translated into the musical Veltar language, but the emotion needed no translation. After the ceremony, Lisa met with the Veltar Council to discuss the future relationship between their peoples. The war was over, but there was still much work to do, rebuilding damaged worlds and establishing permanent peace. The council offered Lisa a position as joint commander of the combined human and Veltar fleets. They said that the galaxy would need defenders to protect against future threats. The alliance that had won the war should continue to keep the peace. Lisa accepted the position, but only if she could keep Kirith's father's sword. She explained that the blade had become a symbol of the friendship between their peoples. It represented the trust and sacrifice that had made victory possible. The council agreed that the sword belonged with Lisa now. It had chosen her as its new bearer during the final battle. The ancient weapon would serve as a reminder that different peoples could work together to achieve impossible things. Years later, Lisa established a new military academy where humans and Veltar trained together. Young warriors from both species learned to combine their different strengths and approaches to combat. The academy motto was taken from Kirith, final message to Lisa. The sword hung in a place of honor in the academy main hall. Students would stop to look at it and ask about the battle where the Shadow War ended. Lisa would tell them about courage and friendship and the importance of never giving up hope. She would explain that the sword was not just a weapon, but a bridge between two ways of thinking. It showed that ancient wisdom and new ideas could work together to solve problems that neither could handle alone. The blade had been carried by many warriors, but its greatest victory was bringing two peoples together. Sometimes at night, Lisa would take the sword down from its place and hold it while she planned lessons for the next day. She could almost feel Kirith's presence in the warm crystal and metal. Her friend's sacrifice had not been in vain, because it led to something greater than victory. The Shadow War was over, but the friendship between humans and Veltar would last forever. The sword would be passed down to new generations of warriors, who would learn from both traditions. They would carry on the legacy of those who fought to save the galaxy. Lisa smiled as she returned the sword to its place. Tomorrow she would teach new students about honor and adaptability, and the courage to do what was right, even when it seemed impossible. The future was bright, because two species had learned to fight as one. The ancient blade caught the light from the windows and reflected it in patterns that seemed to dance with life. It had found its place in a new world where organic beings would never again face the darkness alone. The sword was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead.